The 100th episode of Changing the Face of Yoga will be released on the 22nd of May, 2019. My guest is Lee Blaschke, a longtime and extremely well-known yoga teacher and therapist internationally, and he will talk about how to keep the traditions of yoga and meet your current students' needs. Please join us.
This is Changing the Face of Yoga, and this is episode 99. I have Linda Stern-Lang, who is slightly incredible, let me tell you. Just trying to introduce her is difficult because she has done so much about yoga and has contributed so much to our industry. Linda is a certified yoga therapist. She created the Medical Yoga Symposium in 2014. That was at the Smithsonian. She has continued these symposia and just recently finished one last month in March of 2019. She's been trained in classical yoga, yoga for cardiac care, and yoga as therapy. She's worked in hospitals and universities, and she's also taught medical students. Welcome, Linda. And if there's anything else you'd like to add to that introduction, and I know we could go on and on, would you please do so?
Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. And thank you for that introduction. It is exciting to hear someone try to encapsulate what has been a really exciting career trajectory. I think it's very important for your listeners to know that I did not begin teaching yoga formally until I was 48, 49 years old. It was a passion for me since I was in my late teens and early 20s. And it really, quite frankly, has helped define who I have been in my life, more so since I turned 50 than in my earlier years. So it's been very exciting for me to be able to work with people across all age spectrums, but when you focused a little bit on medical school students, those 8 years when I had the opportunity to work with youngsters in a very formative period of their life, it was very exciting work because it did help them identify with themselves in a very different way than what they were learning about from one another and in medical school.
Oh, interesting. And can you go into that in a little bit more detail?
Sure. And I think it conveys to anyone, really regardless of your profession, there seems to be a point in life where being soft and tender and vulnerable yields to behaviors that are tougher, where we feel that we have to be stronger, and the nature of our relationships with other people begin to shift. Our relationships with ourselves shifts. And so we identify very differently based on the nature of relationships as we get older. So being able to teach what I would call soft skills to young people who were becoming, for the most part, they felt of themselves more as medical technicians than healers. I felt that part of the work that we had to do together was to try on being a healer, which means being in relationship with others very differently and identifying with oneself very differently too.
Yes, I agree. Being a healer is a very different thing than being a technician, isn't it? You've also talked a little bit about how you're expanding this idea of identity using yoga with, at this point in time, two different populations, which is young women in their 30s and 55 to 85-year-olds.
Yes.
I'm in that second group, and I do understand about how I don't know that your identity changes, but I think people's perception of you changes quite a bit, and that can affect your own thoughts about your identity. So can we go ahead?
So I was just going to say that when, as yoga teachers, we introduce our students to the realm of the koshas, it's a very vibrant and seductive way to invite people sort of out of the continuing intellectual dialogue that goes on in one's head and invites them to really consider the way they use their bodies, what their relationship is with their physical vessel. I love taking them through an awareness of their anatomy and then their pranic energies, so that while we're actually doing an asana practice, I invite people to observe their vessels, observe their bodies, to slow down and feel the movement of breath, the beating of their heart simultaneously with the movement of thought. I ask them to get into that manomaya kosha of mind and emotion, to consider the realm of intellect. And then when I talk about the bliss body, anandamaya kosha, as being luminous and radiant and vibrational, to the extent that it actually shines out from deep within us through these other layers, these very tactile layers, people get excited when they've never heard about it before, that we can introduce our students to the philosophy within our practices is very empowering in terms of identity, because then it's not so much what is my physical practice about and how do I think about it, but how do I feel? And for me, Stephanie, one thing that people hear from me is that I really don't care what you think about what I'm saying. I don't care what you think. What matters to me is what you're feeling.
No, I was just going to say, so that should we call it gut reaction is what's more authentic than how you're thinking it through.
Yes, it's a gut reaction and it's an inquiry. So I might ask you to pause and breathe and just notice what you're noticing without needing to find a word for it. So much of our identities are wrapped up in our capacity to explain or describe who we are, what we're feeling, what we're thinking, why we're doing what we're doing. If in a yoga practice you are encouraged, particularly as you might experience it in yoga nidra, if you're invited to quietly observe without trying to find a word, there's a potency. It reminds me of an experience I had with Jack Cornfield. He's a marvelous Buddhist teacher and exemplar in every way. He says that when you sit for your practice and you create safe and sacred space, he says, in this place, you can be totally and completely who you are, without criticism or judgment, without having to change anything. And that really is the basis for most of my teaching now.
How do you get from that space to helping people discover or accept, or whatever term you would like to use, of their identity?
It has to do specifically with how we meet ourselves when we come to the mat. In every practice that I lead, I invite people to notice how they're feeling, and that the practice they might have in mind may not be the practice that their body really needs. So by sitting with themselves in a safe and sacred space, which is a stretch for a lot of people, because in terms of identity, some people always run vulnerable. So if I only know vulnerability, how will I know safety and sacredness? So by inviting people to notice when they first come to the mat, not just their intention, but what's best for their body in any given day. So whether you're 35 years old and just worked all day long really hard, and you're going to pick up your 6-year-old and take them home and make dinner for your husband and take care of the rest of your busy life after that, you might feel like you come to the mat wanting a vigorous physical practice, but what you really need is to restore and replenish, which is not a weakness. But if in terms of my identity, I'm always striving and pushing and yearning, and I don't know what it means to yield, I'm going to judge myself if I give myself a relaxed yin practice, if I really think what I really need is, something yang and intense. So in terms of identity, it's allowing ourselves to make judgments on the mat, really specific asana judgments, pranayama judgments, based on how I feel today. And in a sense, who I am today. Because today I might feel weak. I might feel blue. I might be depressed. And that's okay. Those aren't negative. That's just the way it is today. So I don't have to hide, Stephanie, from how I feel about myself. And I also don't have to describe it critically or judging. Does that make sense?
No, it does. It does. I think that's really interesting. And I can understand these concepts in relation to, I believe you said you're working a lot with two groups of people right now, one of which is the young women in their 30s. And obviously you've explained that very well about how what they feel may be kind of at odds with what they think they should feel or they think they should be. I would like to talk about the 55 to 85-year-olds because I truly believe that identity in that area is, I can't think quite of the word that I want, but it's kind of like, it's what people think of you more than what you might think of yourself. And you can tell me whether you agree or disagree with that.
Well, I think it's very hard to know what other people think of you. That I will tell you. So maybe what you're talking about is projecting, like maybe I'm assuming that someone's going to feel a certain way about me, unless people are asking less of me because they think I have less to offer. I'm not sure. What I will tell you, though, is that with the older group of people, I am more likely to talk about intentionality and goals. With the younger people, I never talked about goal setting, which is really interesting. And now I find that people who have started practicing with me feel like there are more things they can no longer do than things they can do. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So my desire as a teacher, and I shouldn't say this, but this is true, I take some responsibility for whether or not somebody practices. I work with a lot of people who seem to only practice when I'm with them in their homes, or if we're Skyping, or they're in a class. They tend not to practice away from me. So I set goals, and there are two kinds of goals. One goal is, Stephanie, you and I are going to talk about ways in which you would like to practice yoga that will make you physically stronger a year from now than you are today. And I say that irregardless of your health and well-being, because I've worked with people who are in hospice, and they've been in hospice for like a year and a half, which is a long time. Yeah. And they stay strong. It's amazing. So that's a huge part of identity. And I think when we set goals and we work towards them diligently and playfully, it adds quality to life. So that's one kind of goal. And the other kind of goal is that I want people to realize that they can practice throughout the day. So I teach people in their kitchens. I ask them to show me where their computer rooms are. I ask them to show me where they sit and watch television, and we do ergonomics. And so my goal also is for you then to walk into your house after I've left you, and for you to say, oh, I remember what we did. That was great. So I want you to have a relationship with your practice that's off the mat.
Mm. And you have been talking about the physical parts of yoga with this group. Are there other areas that you get into?
Yes, I teach, and for the last 5 years, I've been teaching programs that run a couple of hours a day to 5 hours a day, sort of in-town retreats for a group called the Academy for Lifetime Learning. I live on Virginia's Eastern Shore, which is a very forlorn, wildly beautiful part of the state of Virginia most people don't know about. And I'm teaching a class right now called Doorways to the Heart of Wisdom. And I just finished teaching a class the other day where we used each kosha to tap into our own innate wisdom, and ended the class with a yoga nidra practice. And that has been fascinating. What has come up more often than not, people want to talk about their obstacles to recognizing their own wisdom. Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah. Really.
So I ask, well, where are you looking for it? Because I believe that we find what we're looking for. And that wisdom is inherently ours. So through the asana practice, which is really fun to get people moving, we move in ways that prompt certain questions, especially if we're doing balancings that are unusual or other asana that people don't necessarily think of doing, and tying them to metaphors that are potent. So yes, I'm very interested in bringing philosophy into discussion. I find that pranayam practices lend themselves to discussions of philosophy. So yes, to answer your question, far beyond asana.
Really? And how, could you give us an example of that?
Sure. Let's imagine that we're talking about your health history. And if you think of a yoga therapist, we'll have a battery of questions to ask people about their medical histories, which is always kind of interesting. One of my questionnaires has to do with balance. And I'm interested in the kind of things that throw you off balance emotionally.
Okay.
And how you claim balance. I'm interested in digestion of food and emotional experiences. I'm interested in metaphors of light and space. I was teaching a class the other day and I was talking about spacious awareness, and this woman says, Linda, I can't even understand half the language that you're using. What is spacious awareness? And so spaciousness is not necessarily, we don't think of it as a metaphor, but because we can describe it. But I want people to associate with the idea of spaciousness in a way that is transcendent and infinite. And so I can use real words like finite and infinite and apply them to our practices in ways that are really more metaphorical, because people would not use those words about the breath inside the body as being finite, as a sea of consciousness, or spaciousness beyond the body being an ocean of awareness. But people can get lost in those ideas. And then if we're lucky, start using that language, which reframes the way they see themselves in the world, I think.
Yes, but I think it would be a process. I'm sitting here thinking about what you said, and I can kind of go with it, but I think I'd have to really think it through, and I'm not sure that's what you want me to do.
Well, that's what happens in the groups. What happens is, or if it's one-on-one, is that people have to stop thinking, and what they're left with is emptiness. Because their mind does not necessarily associate anything with what I've just said. And one thing that I have learned is about the quality of an empty mind.
That scares me. I'll be honest with you.
I think it's supposed to sober, not scare.
Okay. I think I went to scare, though.
Interesting. I just started studying Sanskrit.
Mm-hmm.
And it requires another way of approaching the learning process. Adult learners approach things in a certain way based on a lifetime of experience. So a lot of the answers you're getting from me today are a result of how my own teaching has changed, knowing that if I cannot find a word for something, that's wonderful, because then I sit in a different kind of quietness where I realize I'm in relationship with something unknown and maybe even unknowable.
Okay, I can accept that. That things are unknown and unknowable. But to have an empty mind, I think I need a little more work to get there, let's be honest.
I would be surprised. I bet, Stephanie, that there's something that has happened to you within the last week, usually has to do with nature, that took your breath away. Something you witnessed, something you read.
Probably in the last 2 weeks, I could certainly go with that. I was in Japan. I love that culture. So there were several times when my breath was taken away just with small things.
That's the key. It's the small things. And that's what I hope for people to learn in our work together, is that people are looking for some giant epiphany. And yoga happens, ecstasy happens, a quiet mind happens for a moment, and then another moment. Everything that we want isn't going to be, earth-shattering. So your response is just perfect. Small moments of amazement or wonderment.
Yes, that's very true. I also think getting out of your comfort zone. I like Japan, but it's very different from where I live. I think that's very helpful, really, to kind of think of things, to think of things in different ways. It's kind of be bombarded by a very different way of looking at it.
Right. But when I give you an answer that you struggle with intellectually, as an adult learner, you go to a certain place that's not comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than naturally saying, wow, I'd like to sit with that. Or tell me more. Or can you put that a different way? And so what I hope to do, quite frankly, in a lot of my work right now, is bring up ideas that don't necessarily have answers, or introduce ideas that people can play with.
Okay.
I think that the practices ask that of us. They want simplicity. So I'm not trying to make things complicated. I am wanting people to notice that they're used to thinking and problem solving in a certain way. That doesn't necessarily work when you're trying to simplify.
True. And I'm probably very guilty of that because of my background. So I understand what you're talking about there. Sometimes the simplest way is much more productive in a lot.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So the invitations that a teacher might use that have metaphors or stretch out some philosophical concepts, people are working way too hard to try to understand them rather than just hear it and sit with it. But anyway, that just gives you an idea. I can teach in very finite, specific ways, but I also think it's great fun to play with ideas, especially when it comes to our finite nature and our infinite nature, which is where I think this got, I don't want to say bogged down, but maybe more serious.
Yes, it did get serious. I'll give you that, but that's okay. We have to be serious sometimes and really talk about the depth of yoga. I think it's portrayed sometimes as being at one level, and that's about all it has to offer. But I think it's important that we talk about a lot of other dimensions of it, and this is certainly one of them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we've said this. We talked before on the podcast. That's why I'm a little confused before I started recording the podcast. But I would like to talk about, just for a second, how you created the Medical Yoga Symposium that started in 2014 and has continued. Because I think it's a really incredibly creative way to get out the idea that there's more to yoga than this one physical dimension. And if you feel comfortable doing that, I'd really appreciate it.
Extremely comfortable. In 2014, I learned that there was going to be an exhibit at the Smithsonian called Yoga, the Art of Transformation. Deborah Diamond was the curator. I didn't know Deborah, but as soon as I learned about this, I contacted her and said, might I create a symposium called Yoga, the Art and Science of Transformation? And she was very excited about that, and she wanted to know why. And I felt that if I could invite some of the greatest minds in integrative medicine, people who were also yoga practitioners, to the Smithsonian, that it would lend scientific credibility to what people are calling transformative practices. So I invited Dean Ornish and Larry Payne and Richard Miller and Rob Saper and Satbir Khalsa and 5 other amazing human beings to come and talk about their research, their medical research in the realm of yoga and health, physical health, physiological well-being, emotional and psychological well-being, brain health and function. And we had about 460 people come for 2 days of didactic presentation on day 1 and pure experiential on day 2. And after doing that, the Smithsonian Associates, which is the educational 501c3 at the Smithsonian, has become my partner in continuing to bring program into the greater Washington area. And I do this for 2 reasons. I actually do it for many reasons, Stephanie, but one is primarily they have a mailing list of between 30 and 40,000 people who get both the hard copy program and emails of their offerings. And so each time I have an offering, that many members of the general public see yoga as lifestyle medicine programming.
Wow.
And I don't think I can do any better than that.
No, that's impressive. That really is.
And quite frankly, even if the programs were poorly attended, I would be satisfied just to get the PR out there.
Mm-hmm.
But they are well attended. They're sold out. I mean, we've had 3 programs. We've been sold out each time. And what I'm learning is in the last programs that I've done, it's an older audience. And people are hungry for ways to become more healthy, to become more happy, and a new way to perceive themselves later in life. Because it gets harder to create a life of meaning, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
And yeah. So for me, that's how I create a life of meaning.
Excellent. There's just one thing that you told me earlier that I would really like the listeners to know about the very first medical yoga symposium, which was that it was curated and there were docents that went around and talked about, I assume, the pictures, the sculptures, whatever. And then as a partner, they had a yoga teacher who also talked about it from the yoga perspective. And could you just go into that a little bit more? Because I think that's just a really incredible way for a yoga teacher's expertise to be highlighted as well.
No kidding. No kidding. Every yoga teacher, anywhere, yoga therapist, yoga teacher, go to your local museums. Asian art is the easy sell. Basically, my suggestion to them was that a yoga teacher accompany a docent. And for instance, we were standing next to alabaster sculptures of Jain practitioners. And these are among the earliest yoga practitioners. And they believed that if they could sit perfectly still and bring their bodies into perfect balance, that their bodies, sort of quote unquote, would excrete their karmas. They would be cleansed and pure and therefore enlightened. And so the individuals in the tour heard the art historian's perspective, and then we yoga teachers could have people bring their bodies into a centered, balanced position and close their eyes and envision themselves as the sculpture. And alabaster just glows from the inside out so that you can use the symbols of light and radiance along with all of the other wonderful yogic properties of being grounded and meditative, and leave people there to have a physical experience, an emotional experience, an intellectual experience of an ecstatic experience. So it's just so much fun to take what you imagine might be fun to do in your community and find a partner. And I'm happy to help people find those partners. It's so rewarding.
Yeah, I love that idea. I think that's I love art and I love yoga, and putting them together like that just makes my heart sing.
Yeah, and the docents loved it. The docents really had a great time, and the people who were on the tours, their experience of the piece of art changed because they could literally step into it in a very personal way.
Well, it would. It's just not looking at it. It's really experiencing it physically and mentally and emotionally. I just think that's an excellent, really great idea. And I wanted that shared with the listeners so that they would know. Linda, it's been a fascinating podcast. I'm still thinking, trying to get over my scariness. And is there anything that you would really like to kind of finish the podcast with that either we haven't covered in enough detail or that you would really like the listeners to know because we haven't touched on it yet?
I think finding our voice as a teacher takes time, and being comfortable with subject matter takes time. And it's perfectly fine to step outside of your normal way of communicating to bring in ideas that stretch people's minds and encourages them to feel more, feel their questions, and start to relate to themselves through a yogic lens as meaningfully as we can share that with them. So my encouragement is for people to refine their appreciation of the things that they love most about yoga practices. Otherwise, the practice and the teaching can get stale, and our students know it when we get stale. And not to be afraid of ideas and opportunities to share them.
Excellent. Thank you. Now, would you I have several contact details for you, but I don't know which ones are the most efficient, shall we say. So would you give an email address and maybe a website that you think is the best way to either contact you or delve into what you've told us a bit more?
Okay, I have 2 antiquated websites. The best one, if you really want to read and learn about the way I think and what I do, go to therapeuticyogadc.com, as in District of Columbia. So it's therapeuticyogadc.com. You can reach me at Linda Lang at yoga as lifestylemedicine.com. I'm really good at following up to emails. I'm fast. I am also on Facebook. I have a love-hate relationship with Facebook. But I'm Linda Stern Lang on Facebook, and you're welcome to contact me there.
Okay, great. Thank you, Linda. I had some of those. I have some others too. So that's great because I want to make sure that if they have questions or they'd like to explore this a bit more, that they can. Linda, it's been really a great podcast. Went in totally different direction than I expected, which is always exciting for me. I like to be surprised, shall we say. I congratulate you on your journey as a yoga teacher and a yoga therapist. You have, I love finding your voice as a teacher. I think that's really important, and I hope that your thoughts and experience can help others find theirs. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, for the opportunity. Thank you so much.